Good evening, everybody. We'll call the January 24th, 2018 Capital Improvement Advisory Committee meeting to order. Let the record show that we're still waiting Dr. Pinshorn. Next item on our agenda is public hearing and a workshop. Public hearing and workshop regarding the roadway impact fee. And just real quickly before we begin, I'd like to congratulate Mr. Brian James on becoming our new acting city manager. Not quite sure, given the nature of the job, whether that's going to be a congratulatory or a condolence issue.
Good evening, committee members. Bryce, let me know before we start this, as far as the format for the public hearing. We can be kind of flexible on that. It's obviously up to you, but I would suggest that this is handled more as a workshop discussion and even allow participation from any folks who are interested. I don't know that we have too many here tonight to just sort of chime in or approach and ask questions as we go along. And because the presentation that I'm going to give you, some of you have already seen most of it, and most all the information you've already seen before. I'm just going to try and lay out the framework and go over the basics. But stop me at any time, tell me to move along, whatever, and then we'll get into the policy questions and whatnot. Oh, let's see. And also, I have a lot of slides in this presentation that are somewhat repetitive. I have it set up so that we can flip back and forth to certain things as necessary. So if there's a particular slide you have some interest in the information on it, just jot down the number so that we can flip back to it when we need to. So once again, I always go over the background. Starting in 2013-14, the city committees, boards, commissions, and council decided that we should look into a roadway impact fee to possibly be used to provide funding for roadway construction projects that increase capacity in the city. In preparation for that, we updated the master thoroughfare plan, and as a basis for calculation of the impact fee, we put together a capital improvement plan and land use assumptions, and the capital improvement plan is based on that updated master thoroughfare plan. We'll also note that the impact fee program is governed by the Texas Local Government Code, so if we have any questions about how we can implement this program or assess fees, we'll look to Mr. Santee to help us out there. So once again, the purpose of the fee is to provide some funding for new capacity roadways. We had to break our city up into 4 service areas so that fees collected will be spent in the proximity of where they're collected. They'll be spent where they're collected. So these are our 4 areas. Again, it's based on a maximum distance of 6 miles. So we do have a couple spots that wouldn't quite fit in, but we don't expect to see a whole lot of development in those areas, at least not within the next 10 years. So the calculations are based on the 10-year land use assumptions and growth projections and the capital improvement plan, which includes all collector and arterial class roadways that are not already built to their full capacity on the thoroughfare plan. So this is just a reminder of the actual capital improvement plan. All of the roads in red are included in the plan. So the calculation considerations, and this I think Fries-Nichols went through with great gory detail of how the calculations were done, but they do consider existing capacity usage and deficiencies, projected demand, and it determines how much of the capital improvement plan cost can be attributed to the new development. So we're not trying to put all of the cost of building all of the new roads and capacity on the new development, but at least the portion that they're going to be increasing use of the roads. So the result of the calculation is the maximum allowable cost per service unit that may be charged. And the decisions that you're going to have to make to recommend to City Council will be whether or not we recommend that we charge those maximum amounts, and each service area has a different amount, whether we charge those maximum amounts, and if not, what would we recommend to be charged. They are charged based on a service unit, and the service unit for roadway impact fees is the vehicle mile traveled. So the Institute of Transportation Engineers has an average multi-volume tabulation of average trip rates for a variety of land uses. And average trip lengths for the land uses are generated through study and models. So the result from this is a land use vehicle mile equivalency. Now, I won't show you the table that has all of the land uses is actually included in the report that we gave to you last meeting, and it's available on the website if you needed to refer back to it. But I put together a table here that kind of hits some highlights of those land use equivalencies. And so I would say that the vehicle miles per unit of development for these different land uses aren't really subject to debate at this point. They're scientifically calculated, and they follow industry standards. So we've got a maximum allowable cost per service unit that may be charged. So we talked about that. Now, each service area has a different calculated maximum allowable cost per service unit, and that's based on the capital improvement roadways that are within those areas and the growth that is projected to occur in those particular areas. So just a reminder of the service areas, and the calculations came out like so. So service areas 1 through 4, each one has a different maximum amount. If you chose to recommend that we charge the same impact fee per vehicle mile for every location in the city, then we would not be able to charge more than the $1,043.50 per service unit, because we can't ever charge more than that in service area 3. So if you wanted to make it uniform across the entire city but charge the most possible legally, that would be the number, 1,043. So in order to calculate it, you determine the number of service units generated by the development, and I'll go through a couple examples so that you can see just, it's pretty simple. After all the math has been done behind the scenes, it's fairly simple to actually calculate what someone would pay when they pick up their building permit for a particular project. So for a single family residence in, say, service area 1, the first would be determine the number of service units generated by the development. So that's 1 residential unit times how many vehicle miles per unit equals the total number of vehicle miles. So a single family residence is based on number of dwelling units, which is 1. There are 3.37 vehicle miles per unit of development. So every single family residence will be 3.37 times the impact fee per vehicle mile. So the next step is to take that 3.37 and multiply it by the fee, the fee per unit, to get your total. So again, service area 1, 1646, if you chose to do the maximum for that particular area. That would be $5,547 for a single family residence in that case. So I have a couple other examples here. I won't go step by step through it, but I'll kind of skip to the bottom line. In service area 1, for a 10,000 square foot general office building, the maximum fee that could be charged would be $93,657. A 20,000 square foot retail center in service area 2 winds up with a total of $112,180. So there at some point, and Brian will go into this a little bit more with you in a little while, but maybe you're sitting there and you're thinking, okay, $5,000 for a single family residence, that seems like a reasonable amount that we could charge developers, home builders someone buying a new home, that amount tacked on to the current cost of a home seems reasonable in order for us to collect funding to build street capacity. But $112,000 for a 20,000 square foot retail center, we're worried that that's going to drive business out of town. It's possible to look at these things in two different categories. You may decide to charge the maximum fee possible for residential and charge just maybe a 50% of the maximum for commercial. So I'm just throwing that out there that's another decision point that you have to make. We've got some comparisons, and I think this was also in the Friesen-Nichols presentation, the benchmarking that was done looking at the maximum that we've calculated versus what's actually being charged in some other cities. So we've got those figures if we want to refer back to those. So the considerations, I kind of mentioned a couple of them, and these options are just to get your minds thinking, and I think Brian will kind of help to focus us in a little bit because it really gets kind of hairy when you think about all the different ways that this could come out. You could adopt the maximum fee allowable in every service area and collect the maximum for residential, for commercial, starting right away in year one, and that's it. No other discussion. You could adopt the same rate citywide. That would be, I think I mentioned that before, the 1,043, and use that for all residential and commercial. Or you could choose to adopt fees that are a percentage of the maximum. Perhaps you think 75%, which would be reasonable, but again, you would have different numbers for each service area. That's another option. Adopt a flat fee per city service unit, citywide. I'm making up a number, $850. We'll focus in and get into a more realistic number. Just again, giving you some ideas of how you might decide to wind up. Or adopt a different fee based on the area where you might want to encourage growth or use this as an incentive or a disincentive. So you might want to charge much more in a certain part of the community. You could have something else that I haven't mentioned, or say, we don't think this is a good idea, we recommend that this not be adopted. So it's just a variety of things that can be considered. Another thing that I didn't mention was incremental increases. It's possible to maybe look at adopting a certain rate the first year and plan on increasing it over the next few years to sort of ramp up to what we might be able to collect as a maximum. Just some numbers to keep in mind. This is some typical annual development. I think this is what was reported for last year, and these are round numbers, 350 residential units. If we had a roadway impact fee, and if it were $1,600 per unit, which is just the average of the maximums from the 4 service areas, 350 units would generate $1.89 million worth of revenue that could then be used on some roadway expansion. 1 million square foot of commercial, if we assume that's all warehouse, that would generate $6.1 million worth of revenue. So those are just some ballpark figures to know what we'd be looking at if we had decided to go that direction. There's one other thing. I apologize. I did not get the numbers together in order to make a slide for them. So I'm just going to mention it. But one thing that I think is a really important piece of information, and I think we talked about it a little bit at the CCAB, that when we're talking about residential subdivisions, right now, the way things stand, certain subdivisions are burdened more with requirements for roadway construction than others based on their location. And the two that I think are really great examples of this are the Cypress Point subdivision, which is in northern Schertz. It's bounded by Eckerd Road, and Frobisi Road also is a thoroughfare, part of the thoroughfare plan that cuts through between 2 units of that subdivision. So the Cypress Point subdivision has, let's see, I believe 900, and I may have, have my numbers here, 987 vehicle miles, 274 single-family residential units, and 3 commercial lots. But when they developed, they constructed half of Eckerd Road for the entire frontage of the subdivision and the full width of Frobisia as it travels through their property. So they actually contributed, once the calculation is done, 535 vehicle miles to the system. They impact the system by 987 vehicle miles. If we would have charged them impact fees instead of having them do that construction, it would have netted $1.6 million in impact fees. And you can compare that to the Misty Woods subdivision, which is a new subdivision. They're still starting to build homes in it off of Schertz Parkway at the end of Maskey Road. And it also comes out in the Mesa Oaks subdivision, so it's kind of a smallish, and I don't have the numbers for how many units. Bryce, you know about?
36.
Thank you, Lisa. 36 units. They don't have frontage on any thoroughfares that are part of the thoroughfare plan. So they had no obligation or reason to do any construction or any participation in increasing the capacity of the city streets. So their addition to the system is zero as compared to the 535 vehicle miles that Cypress Point contributed. But they've got, tell me the number again, 36? 36 times the 3.37, 121 vehicle miles of demand that they're adding to our system. So the impact fee is also another way for residential, in the case of residential, to sort of even the playing field so that all residential development would participate in the expansion of the roadways, because they'll be using it whether they're directly adjacent to it or not. So this slide is just to remind you of the schedule. We're working this evening with you folks. We're going to talk to Economic Development Corporation tomorrow evening. We're going to go back to CIAC because we did present this to them before, but they didn't know the numbers that we were talking about. And then we'll go to City Council February 6th, but that is only for them to have a resolution to set a public hearing that will take place in March. And then on the 7th, we'll come back, have further and final, hopefully, discussions with this group and have basically a letter fill-in-the-blank style ready to go so that you can decide what your recommendation is to council at that point. So that is my presentation, and then I've got the slides here if you want to, any particular one you want to?
At this point now.
Okay. Okay, and then Brian will talk about and kind of help guide us through the policy discussions. And have a calculator if you need to come in. Well, they might.
They might. We'll see. So one of the things we'll talk to you about in the future that's a bit of information to some degree is a bit more of a comparison on typical development costs, if that's a factor, in terms of what's a single-family residential lot paying now in building permit fees and utility impact fees, and we've talked about that order of magnitude. Utility impact fees, typical single-family homes, about
For water and sewer?
water and sewer,
About $8,000.
about $8,000, order of magnitude. And then typical building permit fees, you're at
Maybe 3 to, depending on the cost of
Yeah.
construction, so maybe 3 to 5.
1,000. Yeah, so you're upwards of $12,000, $13,000, $15,000. And so on the one hand, you go, they're already paying a bunch. Flip side is you go, you know, it's whatever percentage increase off that. But rather than kind of hit you with all of that tonight, I think part of the problem is you get so much information and so many factors coming at you that we thought we'd work it as a bit of an iterative process to kind of say, based on the information we have, what's the thought process, not a final decision, but sort of where do you stand a bit. I mean, we think that helps it frame up a little bit so we kind of move in a direction that we can always back up, we can always reverse, but you're just not hit with too much going, I can't even think which way I want to kind of go forward. So I will say this, you know, one of the things that Kathy talked about is whether or not we have a set fee per service area or the fee varies per service area. There are a bit of pros and cons either way. One, you can say it's a simpler thing, the fact that I've got the same fee in every service area. I'm not having to even ask the question, which service area are you in or which are you not? I will say, though, that the consultant, as part of this, will have an online little computer program we put up where you can look at a map, figure out where you are, plug it in. So it's fairly easy to do a calculation by service area if you wanted to do that. And so what I would say to think about is the only reason to do different fees per service area is if on any of the categories of uses you want to tend to push more toward the max. But if you were to come back, and to be blunt, what most communities struggle with is they tend to want to charge more for residential, particularly if you go, we've got a fair amount of residential going on, commercial has some other benefits. So maybe think about it that way. Is on residential, when we get to that point, if you're looking to say, no, we kind of need to collect as much as possible, then I think you're going to be inclined to say it's okay to charge a different fee per service area going forward. And in particular, the justification for that, when we go back up and look at the service area maps, is we have kind of the most road that needs to be built to some degree in 3 and 1. And so to some degree, if you're developing in that area, that's where you're creating the most need. Makes sense that we would charge you more there as opposed to more the 2. That's the central area. 4 is a bit of a gimme. You can do something different and pull it down if you want because it's such a small little area. So maybe think about it in terms of 1, 2, 3. So from a staff perspective, if you're looking at, hey, let's only charge 33% of what we could per single family residential home. So if you think about it that way and said, given the number of vehicle miles, let's just charge, this amount. To some degree, you can argue then just equalize the dollar figures and simplify it because you're leaving so much on the table by pulling down off the max. But I would say if your tendency is to say, we really need to, even at 350, charging sort of the average, it's 1.8, and that's the money we kind of need, then I would tend to, my recommendation would be you have different fees per service area. And that, to me, is a fairly straightforward way to think about it. If you're going to pull down, then let's not overcomplicate it. But if really we feel like we want to generate a lot of revenue, then it's easy enough to go different fees per service area based on, I think, the fact that when you look at it, it's the amount of roads that we have to build, what we anticipate to be built at the time. And so that's really the question. I think from a staff perspective, what we think is really that question primarily on residential. And again, if you look at it, because this is what sort of sets it up, you look at the vehicle miles per development unit, it's only 3.37 for a single family home. While the other numbers, when you glance at them, you say, well, it's less than that for a multifamily. But a multifamily deal, you're coming in with 300 units on, an 18, 20 acre tract of land. And when you multiply it out, it's a much larger number. The same thing when you look at commercial, because it's not again, 13.63 for a medical dental office. It's 13.63 per 1,000 square feet of a medical. So even if you're doing a 5,000, which is fairly typical, now you're upwards of 65, 70, and that's a big number. And so the reality is that's why the numbers are so high for the commercial stuff, because they generate so much traffic. But the reality is, as we sort of talked about, and Kathy had the example, if we went in and we said we're competing to try to bring in that 1 million square feet of industrial manufacturing distribution space. Kyle, how much did we bring in last year, do you think, in those categories, roughly, the last couple of years? Just to give them an order of magnitude. Yeah, and that's over how many year period, about ballpark? 3 years? So if you assume normally kind of what we're doing is 700,000 square feet, the question is, are we going to get that charging $6 million? And I don't think anybody on staff thinks we're going to continue to bring in that amount of industrial. And so to some degree, keep in mind, the industrial stuff is what really adds a lot of tax value to our community in terms of ad valorem, property taxes, and things like that. With the other uses, there is taxable value, there's potentially sales tax, but I'll go back to that list as something to think about. And what do we hear our residents, what do you hear folks that you know in the community talk about? And what we hear is, we'd like more places to eat. Man, I'm tired of driving down to San Antonio or up to New Braunfels to go to a doctor's visit. A lot of these, while there's value in terms of the taxes, these are things that I think our residents want close by, and we're certainly not helping ourselves, particularly in light of where we are. We are sort of straddled between the Forum and all the retail and everything down there and New Braunfels that frankly now folks aren't coming here because we're willing to drive. So we kind of aren't helping ourselves. And so I think from a staff perspective, we're assuming we would basically look at single-family res as one, look at multifamily as another group, and then kind of just say, let's group commercial as another one. And we may need to kind of parse that out, but we would look at, rather than say I'm going to set one percentage or one amount for every one of those, we think it makes more sense to look at them as three individual groups and sort of say, what do we think we charge on a single-family home? What do we do on a multifamily unit? And then kind of what do we do for commercial? Because we think really our anticipation is we're going to come with very different rates. And so to some degree, sort of push aside the fact that I have to charge the same percentage today or the full dollar figure, if that kind of makes sense. And I guess I'm sort of looking for nods there. And again, you remember last time we took you the figure, told you to let you kind of, ooh, and we're kind of coming back now that based on that, based on you've thought about it, not a final answer, but the idea that, yeah, there is really no way we are going to charge, $6 million for 1 million square feet of industrial. We just wouldn't get any, we're not going to come anywhere close there. We can argue about what that amount may or may not be. And so what we think the argument is, let's focus on single family, and we'll focus on multifamily, then we'll hit the commercial stuff. And what we do on one does not necessarily impact what we do with the other. But keep in mind, whatever we leave on the table, whatever we don't charge, comes from the general fund. But again, the idea is that what are folks kind of willing to do? And I'll tell you, what we hear from folks more often is while you may have particular commercial projects they worry about the traffic impact on, what we hear folks talking about is they are frustrated with the traffic and not keeping up based on residential development coming in. I think that's where the frustration. We really don't get a lot of folks going, that FedEx distribution facility out there off Dover, that's not what we hear. What we hear is, down south, we had Rhine Valley come in, we've got Crossvine, we've got a whole bunch of traffic out there on 1518 or Graytown Road with all the Halley's Heights, Laura Heights stuff. It's the residential. And so again, our impression is the community is probably more supportive of, whether it's the reality and the numbers don't play it out, that not that they're generating more traffic, but that the problems we are having, the frustrations, are caused more by residential in the areas where those are occurring than they are caused by the commercial. And that, again, would be a reason to do that. And so, again, barring that, when we come back, we'll kind of tackle single family, we'll tackle multifamily, and then we'll tackle commercial industrial. The assumption is we're not going to try to keep them relative to one another or same percentage. We'll just deal with each as its own separate thing. And I guess I'm looking for a nod from the commercial commissioners that seems a logical way to go about it. Not that you can't deviate, go back, but Commissioner?
Before we do that, let me go ahead and open the public hearing. Public hearing we open at 6:28. If anybody in the public wishes to come and ask any questions or have any comments on this, please come forward to the microphone, state your name and address for the record, and ask or make whatever statement you need to make. All right, seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and leave the public hearing open so that way Commission can have a discussion with staff, and if anybody in the audience does have a question that comes to mind as a result of the discussion, feel free to come up and join the conversation.
I'll start out Real quickly, we don't have any impact fees at this time, correct?
So we don't have any roadway impact fees. We have utility impact fees. We
That's
have
what I
no
meant.
roadway impact fees. Yes, sir.
Go ahead. Ken, go ahead. All right, my question was gonna be, and I don't know which slide it was, but the second or third slide says, all of fees collected must be utilized in the area that they're collected from.
That's correct.
In other words, whatever we collect in area one, that's it.
That's it.
I mean, it can't be used in 2, 3, or 4, or 5, or
Yep.
whatever areas we got.
That's exactly right. So where we collect it has to stay in that area. Yep.
You could end up with a couple of $1 million in the bank, and you can't spend it.
So here's maybe the caveat I would say with that. The maximum fee we could collect, even if we charge the full max on everything, based on the work that was done, we would not, it would be very unlikely that we would build all the roads and have money left over in the bank. And that's for a couple of reasons. One is the state doesn't let you charge the full amount. They've got that credit that goes into it. So when they put that credit in, then there's not enough money quite to build those roads. The other thing is road construction does not get cheaper over time. It gets more expensive. So keep in mind, this is a window of time and this grows, but we keep the amount. And so that means the actual cost of the road's going to, so I'm not going to have money left over. And then lastly, there is no way we are going to actually charge the maximum amount, which means we aren't going to have money left over. So it's not a concern with that. And then what would happen is as we update these in every 5 years, we redo the calculation. And so again, I have seen in communities, and we've seen it with utility impact fees, where based on what looks to be built or as you build roads, those fee amounts can come down. And so what you'll see is over time, as roads start to get built, you may see those fees come down based on how much development's left. So that's not a concern that we think that we're going to have money left over, that we're overtaxing people, if you will, or overcharging, and then we'll have money. We think, in fact, it's going to be the opposite of that, that there's a lot we still have to pay for going forward.
So I've had a few conversations with people outside, and I guess seeking some clarification on this. And so let me come up with a real simple hypothetical example. You know, we know that developers, when they come in, whether it's single family or commercial, that they have to improve the adjoining roads if necessary.
That's correct.
So if you have a project that comes in and based on charging roadway impact fees, that they would have an impact fee that would be due and payable to the city of $10,000. And the developer's actual cost for the roadway improvements that he's currently required to make is $5,000. What happens then?
Okay, so that's a good example. So a developer comes in, and we run those numbers on the front end. So essentially, he gets, and I'm going to say this way, but how we actually do it's different. He gets a credit effectively equal to $5,000. Okay, so he doesn't then have to pay roadway impact the full $10,000. He built the road, so he's got a $5,000 credit. So effectively, he would only pay $5,000 in roadway impact fees. Does that make sense? Yep. So he's putting out $5,000 to build a road. He's paying $5,000 more. His total cost toward roads, road construction and impact fee is $10,000. Now, say the guy next door doesn't build any road. He just pays us a check for impact fees for $10,000, and the guy on the other side builds a bunch more road, and it cost him $10,000. He just builds that road, doesn't pay any impact fee. Now, the mechanics of how we apply that credit, the mechanics of the basis of that credit, we'll work through later on. Again, I think we're trying to get an order of magnitude, and then we'll go through some of the pros and cons of the more fine-tuned detail in terms of, is it a dollar-for-dollar credit? Is it a vehicle mile credit? Do we work deals where we cut the impact fee in half, or do they not pay anything for the first units, and then they pay the full amount for the last half of the units?
Okay, now the follow-up question on that is what happens when the developer's actual cost is more than that $10,000?
Okay, so again, this is a policy question that we've got, and this goes into a little more of the fine grain with it. My initial position is that we don't look at the developer's actual cost with regard to road construction, okay? The problem is it's an incentive for the developer, as much as we try to review those numbers, to inflate their cost for road construction, okay? And so it complicates it by the fact. Now, what I would argue is, if that's a big concern, so say we impose this fee and then 3 years from now something happens and road construction cost goes way, way up, and you're going, well, wait, reasonably these developers' road construction cost is way higher and we're not giving them a dollar for dollar credit, then what y'all would likely say is, let's rerun the numbers to give them a credit, and we could redo the study to come back to that. It's more complicated. The problem with their actual cost is it's an incentive to them to inflate the cost that we can't catch. And really, if you think about the basis of this, what we sort of start with, it comes down to how much traffic are you putting on the road? The fundamental deal is how much traffic are you putting on the road, how many vehicle miles per development unit, and really with road construction, the fundamental unit is how many vehicle miles of capacity you add to the system. And so if you think that the basis of it is traffic generated and capacity of road added, the way to go is you give credit based on vehicle miles added and not consider necessarily the fact that their actual cost associated with it. And to some degree, keep in mind this as a caveat. If you pull down the dollar figure charged at all, if you say we just can't charge that full max, you've already thrown into chaos this thing with developers, the guy building the road and the guy not building the road. At that point, that's really, in my mind, the bigger equity issue. Then you're not considering the amount I spent and you're giving me a vehicle mile. The bigger issue is the fact that, hey, this guy's still able to outdo me because he's got this artificially low roadway impact fee. So our example of you build 5,000, you pay 5, you build 10,000 worth, you don't build any, that's the scenario that throws that out the window. And that's, I think, from my history of this, that's the bigger issue with the developers, not you're not giving me a vehicle. Now, likely what we would do, we would put some provision, working with the attorneys in the code, that if somehow there is a section that we blew the estimate on, and there's some extreme, like we didn't realize there was a bridge there, we would probably have to put in a mechanism to deal with that, because they would argue it's unfair. Your costs are so, you messed up on this thing, as opposed to costs just have gone up, and you start with that as a static. So that would be my answer to that is, well, it seems like a big deal. If you start pulling down the fee, that's the bigger deal, and this is less so. It also becomes problematic because that incentive to inflate the number that we can't catch.
I've had a couple of thoughts about the process. My observation of what we're seeing out there in terms of development, in my mind, the major traffic generator today is the single-family residence development. When I see a Walmart or something like that come in, typically they're already building on 3009 or 35 or someplace that, even if we collected fees from them, there's really not much left to develop. There's some exceptions to that up in the industrial park, Lookout Road's looking a little shabby and things like that. So I think the idea of having different rates or different fees for the different classes, one of the things I thought about doing was starting with single-family residential. And, you look, I don't know what to say about Service Area 4. It's just such an anomaly.
Yeah.
But for instance, if you look in Service Area 1, the maximum allowable fee is $5,500. So you throw that on top of the 8 or 9 they're already paying. It's starting to get a little pricey, and there are some concerns about the price of housing, the cost of housing in the city. But one of my thoughts was to take a stab at what's a reasonable roadway impact. What's a reasonable amount that we could add to a single family residence? And off the top of my head, that was $1,000, but let's say $1,500. And we back into the impact fee by dividing that $1,500 by the SUEs. So it's roughly $500. Well, then take that $500 fee and apply it to that 20,000 square foot warehouse. Or, and you know, pretty soon, while 500, or in this case 1,500 sounded pretty reasonable for a house, you know, you're looking at $250,000 to $500,000 on a commercial project.
Yeah.
That's just, question that popped in my mind, just ballpark, does anybody know that hypothetical 20,000 square foot office complex, what does it cost to build that today?
Yeah, we can get you, and we'll come back with those numbers next meeting. I'm hesitant to throw them out with all the cost figures because we actually permit, your building permit fee for commercial is based on the cost of construction, so we can come back, when we come back with examples, and say, this is what they said the cost of construction was.
And you know, what I was kind of fishing for there is you know, what would that hypothetical roadway impact fee be as a percentage of that cost? You know, if it's going to cost me $500,000 to put up that building, and then the city wants another $250,000 in road, you know, it pretty soon it makes it. So I'm kind of leaning towards the idea of developing or coming up a consensus of what's a reasonable fee. You know, again, start with single family. What's a reasonable fee? How much do we think we can add without, you know, doing a whole lot of damage, and then back into a fee for single family residential and charge that same fee across the city?
So if I may.
Sure, go ahead.
Because you said something very important, in which is, we take that single family, and how much can we charge without doing a lot of damage?
Yes.
And so part of what you needed to define what damage is. So I'll be honest, the inspections department issued over 50 new single-family permits in December. If you were to have imposed this fee, and if instead of 50 permits, they issued 40 permits, 20% hit, I think the inspections department would say, we're okay with that. We got plenty of work to do. And that was a large number of permits a month, but if you were to say, instead of doing 400 new single-family homes a year, we did 350, is that a problem for our community? Maybe, maybe not. The other way you may define damage, though, and this is really, I think, the other thing people worry about, is that cost for the guy who's not building a road today and is now just paying a fee, or you built some road, the $5,000 and paying, that's rolled into the price of the home. So one of the issues is, yeah, we're doing fewer, and we may be okay with that, but the price of those homes we're doing is higher for people to buy, and if we are concerned about people's ability to buy into the community because of those values, that would be a concern. I'm going to complicate it by, in my opinion, the real value developer is lot size that we have. So without batting an eye, we jacked up lot size. And think about it. If that developer is selling a lot for $30,000 a piece, maybe, if on that project he got 3, 4, 5, 6 more lots off a couple hundred unit project, it's like, I'll pay that fee, whatever. Rack up your maximum there, give me those lots, and I'm coming off better, because his cost is effectively the same.
Yeah.
And so I would simply say, keep in mind there are other things that we have done that, in my mind, have a bigger impact. But I think it's a valid point, but I think it's important to define damage.
I'll share an experience, a story with that I'm sure for the commission can roll this into their thinking. You know, as the fire marshal, I was a big proponent of residential fire sprinkler systems, and you know, you're talking $2 to $3 a square foot, maybe. That's the kinds of zones. So you're looking at a 3,000 square foot home. $5,000 to $6,000. And the builders didn't even want to consider that. They said, no, you'll price us right out of the market. And yet that same home buyer will turn around and spend $10,000 upgrading their carpet, their cabinets, building a deck. So part of me is saying, okay, so throw that $5,000 impact fee out there, and they can do without their deck.
Yeah. So,
But you're right. Defining the word damage, I don't necessarily want to run them off. And,
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I think they're responsible for a lot of the traffic issues we're facing today. So, we need, they need to contribute something.
yeah.
Well, our average home prices now they've gone up so much over the last 7 to 10 years. I mean, it's just phenomenal to begin with.
Yeah.
So any additional costs truly do impact the sales, and the price of new homes in particular has gone up immensely. I can't tell you a single dollar amount, but we were out looking at some recently that price per square footage, they're selling for $180 a square foot for a simple home in Schertz. And people used to gag at $100 a square foot. So when you start adding a couple bucks a square foot here and there, it does add up pretty quickly. And of course, there's different phases of this too. If you add this to the developer, that's one thing, because he puts it into the lot price. You put it to the builder, and they scream bloody murder, because they're trying to eke out, $1 out of every square foot, $1 more profit out of every square foot. So they'll spend a little bit more on a lot if they think that they're going to get a good deal in a neighborhood, but they're still going to cry over the price per square foot of the house itself.
And so to be clear, per state law, we would charge this at time of building permit. So it's the builder that's paying. Now, what a developer who builds roads and has a credit does is they work that into the price of their house, their lot, once you have a roadway impact fee. The other thing I may say, and this is, I'll probably get it wrong, but if you go to SCUCISD's website, the Community Advisory Committee,
Just going to mention that.
in their demographic report, I think the cost of a new home in the city of Schertz in SCUCISD, so not the whole city, a portion of it, is about $289,000. So again, think about what you all paid for your home, and maybe some of you who are in a fire hazard area paid a lot more for your home and things like that, or not. But, I can't afford a house that much, not near what we paid for our house, and many of you, especially if you live there, are going, wow, we didn't pay that, and my parents didn't pay that. That's a big expensive number, and things are more expensive in land-to-land development costs. But just to give an order of magnitude, a new home in SCUCISD and Schertz is almost $290,000, and that the value is the highest in SCUCISD and Schertz than the other communities. And again, as Commissioner Outlaw said, that we don't do 5-foot side yard setbacks, we do 10. That a developer would go, I'll pay that full residential impact fee in a heartbeat, or have the builder, if you went to 5-foot side yard setback. That is a more expensive thing for them. And then again, utility impact fees, we're $4,000 for water, $4,000 for sewer. But it's death by 1,000 pinpricks. If we had done roadway first, we'd be talking this with something else, but we're coming at it now. The other thing to keep in mind, and this I really would suggest doing, is a phase-in, and it's certainly fine to start with a fee, assume that it will bump at a time, but we've got the ability to pause it if we have a concern that before that time it will hurt. If we kind of watch the effect of a phase, set that automatic trigger, and unless we pull it down, it goes into effect. That does a couple things. One is it lets you kind of watch the impact this has on development as you phase in and see before you do a big thing and we go a year and a half and realize we've made a mistake. The other is it signals to developers, this is when this stuff is going in, and you can plan for it. You can assume it'll go up, and they can factor it in their costs going forward.
Can you pull up the land use equivalency chart? Why is medical dental so out of whack from everybody else? Did Kathy mention before that these are nationwide standards?
So yeah, what it is, it's from the IT, so these are studies that are done nationwide. So one of the things that you get, and this is a challenge with this, And again, I'll do the thing. If those of you who have kids, and remember when your kids were little, particularly if you've recently or you've got grandkids or nieces and nephews, when you take them to the pediatrician, I got to tell you, man, pediatricians are packing those kids in, and they're rolling them through. And so that's part of the reason is it's just the turnover with regard to it in terms of medical and dental kind of coming through. So one can argue, I'm a specialist, I do heart something or other. It probably is a lower, but what we've got is the ITE with broad categories.
I just find it odd that it's twice as much as a convenience store with gas pumps.
So here's one of the things to keep in mind with this.
I'm mentioning that because I'd much rather encourage medical and dental offices than I would another convenience store.
So let me be very clear. The vehicle mile per unit of development equivalent is not the number of trips they generate, although we talk about it that way sometimes. We kind of fall into that. It's not just the number of trips. So for instance, a single-family residential unit doesn't generate 3.37 trips necessarily. It's a function, again, with our study and the fact that it goes up of the length of the trip, and it also a credit for pass-through trips. So here's an example I'll give you. Commissioner Dahl may know this. Typically, when you're going to the grocery store, and it's different maybe a little bit with now you can order online at HEB and pick it up and have them load it in your car and everything like that. But if you think about it, 5 years ago, you typically got up and you went to the grocery store, and that may be different than you did 40 years ago. But now you got in your car, you went to the grocery store, you're buying your Bluebell ice cream, and you were booking it home before that starts to melt. So you go there, you go back. Grocery stores, and again, have changed. If you think back when you were a kid, grocery stores tended to be smaller, San Antonio or Handy Andy. Now they're much bigger. In the past, you had one aisle with sodas. And it was, you could buy Coke, you could buy Pepsi, maybe you could buy Sprite, Big Red Diet, and you could buy bottles, the glass bottles and the big jug. Now, literally, how many different kinds of Coke do you have? You can buy little mini cans, you can buy bottles. You've got this huge aisle. So they're bigger. You tend to, again, used to go there and back. But think about when you get gas. Other than occasionally when I get home from these late meetings and my wife says, I'm out of gas, can you go fill my car up? And I go, oh, yeah, I'd be happy to. I fill up with gas on the way to and from work or the way to and from somewhere else. So that is factored in. So the reason convenience stores lowers, most people don't make a special trip to the convenience store. Typically, you're going to the convenience store and you're going somewhere else and you're swinging in, and that's factored in why the costs are a bit less. It's the distance you're willing to travel as well as a factor in, which is part of what affects the medical and dental too. So there are those factors. It's not necessarily the number of trips. It's these other factors that cause the number to skew. But again, what you have the ability to do is you have the ability to broadly say for industrial uses, whatever they are, we're going with this. For commercial, medical, dental, office, retail, we're going with this. You have the ability to play with these as you wish to do some things like that. So again, I'll tell you, often if you look what cities around the state do, cities that go, man, we've got too much multifamily, we've got too many apartments coming in, they charge the full amount on apartments. Those that have a lot of single family coming in and high value, they don't bat an eye at charging the full. But if you're trying to do economic development, those cities, and I think we've seen that, you tend to pull down your commercial stuff. Again, if you're a community with not much going on in terms of res, you're trying to get it and you think the other stuff will come after.
You mentioned earlier used the comparison of a 1 million square foot warehouse.
Yeah.
For comparison, how big is Amazon?
1.3 million.
1.3. Okay.
Now again, if Amazon were coming at 1.3, they'd probably look to EDC and go, I got this, what is that, $8 million impact fee, and they would look to EDC to incent that. EDC's sitting on, doesn't matter, but not enough to do that a couple times over. That's the issue. So again, yeah, I can tell you, if Amazon were coming in and they looked, if they had another site that fit their location criteria that didn't have it, you got a $6 million, $8 million right there. We're not getting them.
And
No, but So that leads me to another question. Can the EDC use the impact fee, use a credit or a reduction as an incentive? Or is the impact fee set in stone?
So here's what could happen. EDC, and we have and so Tim and Kyle can jump in, but we have a policy in terms of what sort of things we incent and at what level. You're generating ad valorem of a certain amount, you're bringing in certain jobs with a pay at a certain amount. So if it meets the criteria for an incentive, EDC can look at it and go, how do I sort of strike this deal? How do I structure it? How do whatever? They can go, I'll give you an incentive of this, and that's to help offset this impact fee. So they can do that. But again, what I would say is, I would not look to EDC as this unlimited bank, because they're already sort of doing stuff that people would expect them to do. So again, we gave an incentive to Amazon to come in already that we think is a good deal. We roll that in, it maybe doesn't make sense.
So can the impact fee be adjusted, or is it set? And a
So-
credit of some sort has to be given some other place.
So what I would say is, once we pass the impact fee ordinance, we can't be willy-nilly as a city, I'm going to cut your fee in half. That's problematic. We got to set it how we set it, not on a case-by-case. Otherwise, you get every residential developer going, it's me.
But can we do it, or is it not allowed?
No, what you can
Is it a
do
choice or not?
now,
Yeah,
or,
yeah.
right now, you can go in and go, we're only going to charge for single-family residential. And I'm going to charge $1,000, no more than $1,000 per unit. That fits with the max, you can do that.
No, but if we set a fee,
Once you set it, you can't be coming back playing with it
Okay.
for a project by project. You would look to EDC and go, we set our fee at what we need, EDC, you play with it. I gave you an extreme answer, but it's problematic for us. It becomes arbitrary that why'd you give this guy and why'd you not give that guy?
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't understand the question.
But Brian, I wasn't sure I was going to ask this question. And that deals with the meeting schedule. I think as I may have related to you, I'm not going to be here on the 7th.
Yeah,
And that's on purpose, because when I was making these travel plans months ago, I looked for a hole in the schedule. So the question is, we've been kicking this roadway impact fee thing, we've been working on this for ages. Why all of a sudden kind of the rush to get it done?
yeah. So if it appears to be a rush, I don't know that there's necessarily a rush on part, because you're right, we've been there a long time. I think the challenge we face is that to some degree, from a staff perspective, we are certainly willing to push the schedule to take more time if we need it. Happy to do that. If we say, I need this additional piece of information, I need that. I think part of what we didn't want to do, though, is just stretch this thing out, because, and maybe you'll agree, maybe you won't, we could struggle with this decision for a year and kind of never get there. The other is, as we go through the information, you start to forget about it and you go forward. And again, from my experience, and I could be wrong and certainly can respect that, at some point I think even when we come back with all this information about here's what a permit costs and here's what that, would not surprise me that your sort of gut number that you threw out a bit ago is where you still end up. It's just so overwhelming and it's so hard to predict.
And realistically, you could have scheduled it for our next scheduled meeting, and somebody else can't be here.
Somebody else could not be there.
If I might ask, I get the impression, and I'm sorry if I'm stepping on your toes, Mr. Chairman, that what you're looking for from us eventually is a recommendation to City Council that here's what the impact fee should be.
For these kind of uses and kind of roughly how
Yeah,
we phase it.
and, when I sit here, everything we're going to look at tonight on the regular P&Z agenda, everything there has a staff recommendation attached to it. And so I'm kind of floating out here going, I told you some of my thoughts, but, for us to sit here as a board and come up with a number, might it not be more appropriate for the staff to throw us some numbers?
Sure.
And then we can, I don't know what the
I think that's kind of the intent all along, based on the discussions I've had with staff in our morning meetings.
So here's what I'll give you. Yeah, when we come back for decision, you'll have a staff recommendation. Here's maybe the thing that makes this complicated. So when we have zoning cases like we do tonight, or plats or things, so for example, we met with a developer today who was looking to do a project, and they came in and they said, hey, what about septic? And I can do this half-acre lot thing, and we can do septic. That's the minimum that's required. Staff said, you're welcome to ask for what you want to ask. It requires a variance to do septic. Our commission has made it fairly clear that they are not comfortable doing septic on half-acre lots. It was 5 acres, now it's kind of 2 acres, and that's kind of where you are. So staff was able to offer that to them, just like we're able to make recommendations on the items tonight. So a developer comes in and says, I want to shrink those side yard setbacks. Generally, the answer is you can't do it. With all the stuff we make a recommendation on, that recommendation literally is on years of hearing you. Plus the septic thing. We have heard you, we understand that, and we were then able to help facilitate and craft that. So we will do that. But what I'm trying to gauge, so for example, would not have surprised me if Tim Brown had said, I don't know why you're talking about pulling down commercial at all. Those numbers seem low to me. I think we're fine, charge to the full for commercial. Didn't think that would happen. He could have. And so, but that's really what we're trying to do, is the point of this conversation is really for staff to sort of hear you. So what I have heard is what I thought, which is that commercial stuff is way, way high. And what we're hearing, not necessarily where traffic's generated, but the complaints we're getting on congestion is generated by residential, so look to res for a larger amount. We are concerned about significantly impacting residential development, though if it drops it a little, I'm not hearing that that's hugely problematic. We're concerned about the cost of houses going up, and that goes. But we understand that we're in some ways with that, we're leveling the playing field, and so now the one guy's able to compete. So again, go forward. What I'm getting the feeling too is that we are hesitant to jump in with something too high that may be more than we think it can bear in light of those things. So plan to come in with something that steps up, starts out slow and steps up and gets there, and we have the ability to pull back as we go forward. That's what I'm sort of hearing. I am not getting the impression, even on single-family residential, even with a step, that at this point in this window, you're comfortable going to the full amount. I'm not hearing that. Now, it may be 3/4 of that, maybe 2/3 of that is where I'm kind of getting, but probably don't come back with the full amount. Let's ease into it a bit going forward. So you will get it. Part of the point of this is us listening to you really to try to come back with something as a recommendation, and that's kind of what I'm hearing from you at this point.
Yeah, I'd like to see you come back with L1, 2, 3, the areas 1, 2, and 3, and give us a cost of a single-family residential.
Yep.
Give us the cost of a commercial, and with that one, however, piece. If we were looking at commercial in area 2, then we could also have one that's it's showing the high side if we stay this way, but we can also replug that number and you can show us what the low side is.
Yes.
Or maybe a medium or where we ought to be. And the same thing with the residential. If you can give us the formula, I think all of us can say that, can we start at this point?
Yes, sir.
And go from there maybe up, and if not, if it doesn't succeed, then we have to come back and have a new meeting.
Yeah, we can certainly do that. Again, I think you're right. On the one hand, that additional information may be what you need and helps you really clarify where you want to be. The flip side may be, okay, I've got that. At some point, I'm still feeling what I'm feeling in my gut, and I'm kind of going that direction. So yeah, we can provide that. We just didn't want to overwhelm that up front and not kind of iteratively work our way through it. And so again, my earlier statement of what I'm hearing is we are really concerned about commercial, way out of whack. Not that we want them to not pay anything necessarily. We don't want to have a significant impact to damage residential to significantly drop off the number or to ratchet price is way up based on the full amount. We're concerned about not going in with too high a fee on the front end, and we're wanting to step up. And for us, frankly, that helps us shape it. So even when we come back with those numbers, I think those fundamental feelings that you're thinking about will still be there. Now, you may look at some and go, wow, that's a lot cheaper to build that than I thought, or more expensive than I thought, or the fees are higher or lower than I thought. But I think those core feelings you have will still be there, and it's helpful for us to identify that at this meeting, which was the point of doing this, because that may not be as clear if we had brought everything at once. Right or wrong, that was the thought. And so, to some degree, if y'all say, yeah, what you've kind of stated there a couple times captures what we're generally feeling, then I think we have enough formula. We don't need to keep going on. We'll come back and we'll lay out, here's the cost of construction, here's the full cost of the fees, and what we may do based on looking at that is have that dollar figure within and go from there. And again, if at that point the commission says, look, let's add another meeting, let's add another two, we can do that. Happy to, because you may feel like, yeah, a little more nuance may help us get something closer going forward.
Are you able to, or will you be able to come up with a desired figure for how much you want to have in the roadway impact fund? Or are we just going to gather money and hold on to it? Because what I'm looking at is, based on our needs for roadway improvements, we got that figure, $200 and something million,
Yeah,
roughly, over the course of I don't know how many
forever,
years.
but yeah.
So is the city capable of coming up with we would like to spend X number of dollars per year on building roads, or we have to spend X amount of money per year on building roads. We expect the roadway impact fees to cover 20, 30, 40, 50% of that, and the rest is going to come from bonds, loans, the same way we did the Schertz Parkway. That was a loan, I think we did.
Yeah.
Or are we going to sell bonds in the future? Either way, citizens are going to be paying for the roadways. So do we want to collect it at the front, or do we want to collect it in the end? And do we want to see pitchforks and torches out in the front of the building when we raise taxes for a bond issue? Do we want to do that, or do we want to put it into an impact fee? Because let's just use Rhine Valley and let's say Crossvine as an example. If I knocked on doors out there, would anybody be able to tell me what they paid for sewage and water impact fees?
No. Couldn't bat an eye. It's just the house, it's the price. The price that the builder has to charge, they negotiate that into the developer's price per actual developed lot. The developer, having known that, he negotiated that when he bought the land. That's where it comes out of.
It seems to me on some of these developments, especially on the south side, that if I'm going to pay $400,000 for a house, I would expect to have a decent road to get to and from my house. And I can look at Graytown and I can look at some other roads down there. It's abysmal. And we have no way or no plan to fix those roads in the near future. So can part of your figure that
Sure.
you come back with kind of have that
So,
in the calculation?
yeah, no, we can certainly do that. And I think we wanted, knowing y'all might have that, part of what we did with that is we looked at that example of single family to give you a feel for how much that brings in. So again, 350 is not a crazy number. We've kind of been going, I think we did how many last year? You remember?
I think it was more like 384.
384. So again, order of magnitude last year. So 384, assume it's 350, close enough. Charging at the 1,600, which is the kind of that average of them, on the high end, that's $1.8 million. So we can come back and we will next time give you, and this is where we can use the calculator and play with the math. If we charge half that, I'm at $900,000. We've got cost estimates from the developer for Eckert Road that Parklands is doing. So we can tell you, here's what they're paying, or here's what the study says, and you know how far that gets us. And you may go, well, if we got $1.87 million, we could build Maskey all the way from where it stops all the way over to 1518, and Kathy would laugh and say, yeah, no, you can't.
Well, we spent just under $1 million for a small strip of Schertz Parkway.
That's a good example.
Granted, it's concrete, and most of these will be asphalt, but still, we've got that little piece of bit for $1 million. 1.8.
Yeah,
that's
and the
nothing.
concrete was, And that's divided across the service areas. So again, if they all came in there, that's what you have. So again, keep in mind, at that amount, just doing res, I'm throwing this out. Wouldn't surprise me that you're waiting 8-10 years to be able to build Maskey off this.
Yeah.
It is so we will have that for you. And I think that's a very good point. Is one way to look at it is how much do we bring in, what can we build if we charge, and then I think you'll revert back to what's that cost per house or industrial development. But yeah, we'll have all those numbers and can kind of play with it to go this many and this many and this many, and this is how much that equals.
Yeah, I think one way to think about it, and I think this was mentioned in one of the other meetings where we've heard this, is regardless of what we decide, if we only decide to collect a third of it, that's a third more than what we're getting today.
Yeah.
Right now, the taxpayers are funding this entire
Whole thing.
project. So anything we can get out of the impact fees is at least a step in the right direction.
Yeah, and so if we imposed a lower fee to start, and which is what I think I'm hearing you lean to, and we watch and we go, look, our res numbers didn't drop at all, and maybe they would have gone higher if we hadn't. I don't think anybody's going to go, oh, that's a problem. They're going to go, yeah, it really didn't have the impact. And if we didn't see a huge increase in terms of the home price that we think is based on that, then we kind of work our way into it, and then lets us look at it. So
It's just a couple of comments. We mentioned the differential in the price in the homes between Schertz and some of our neighboring communities, and a lot of that is due to our different requirements in the UDC, the banning of the R6 and R7, the small lots, the setbacks, the masonry requirements along the borders between the residential and the arterial roads, or residential and commercial. All that has a cost. And so if we're really concerned about cost, then, that is another issue that we need to look at. And, for my part, I would rather see a higher quality of development and pay more for it than to lower our standards. And that's something that we've never been afraid to, is to maintain our standards. And looking at bringing in the impact fees, I think is part of that standards. It's our pavement condition index shows we need upwards of $50 million for existing streets. The thoroughfare plan's about $200 million for full build out. We've got to come up with the money somewhere, and this is a funding mechanism, and as long as it's implemented fairly and equitably, I agree with Mr. Outlaw that I think this is something that I would prefer that we come in with a smaller number up front and scale it up over 3 to 5 years, and look at making adjustments as needed. I like the idea that our community for the last year or so we've collected more taxes from commercial than we have residential, and want to see us continue in that direction. And so being lower on the commercial impact fees, I think, is something that we need to seriously consider, because it reduces the tax burden on the residents that are in the community. And I think that's about all I have on comments.
Okay.
Commissioner Ray, you've been quiet down there. Any comments?
No comments, just learning.
And if I can make one more just kind of general observation out there. A few years ago, your Planning and Zoning Commission, found out that, hey, we got roads that we can't get fire trucks in and out of because we allowed islands in residential roads, things along that line. And it wasn't that you were doing that blindly or anything else. It was just something that didn't come up. Today I was out at the Crossvine, and those cul-de-sacs are huge. Okay, but that costs a lot of money. And that's why the home prices down there, for all intents and purposes, they're in the 400s.
Yeah.
But it's a community that is unlike anything else, and I think that's the model going forward, or at least I would hope it would be something like that, where it isn't just big, it's also safe for the community. It allows access for emergency vehicles and things like that, although nobody didn't think about it, but nobody thought about it. And this is one of those costs. We got to figure it out. And I agree that too much is it's going to be a pushback from the builders and the not so much the developers, but the builders. because they're really penny conscious on their profits, trust me. But I think it's a good thing. We should start it. I think we should probably do an elevated or a graduated program and take a look at it. And again, on the commercial side, I think they bring us more benefit in tax base, wages, et cetera, than trying to gouge them for $6 million per million square feet. So, because they're going to ask for something directly or more in return. So that's all I got.
Just one final thing is, I've been coming to planning and zoning meetings since about 2004, 2005. I've been up here for about 7 years as a commissioner. And during this whole time, our city has managed to grow at a pretty sustainable 3 to 5% growth rate before the recession, during the recession, and after the recession. And, as long as we pay attention to that and focus on maintaining that sustainable rate, I think that'll get us where we need to go.
Okay. So again, we will come back and we will have all that data, because I agree, you're not going to make a decision until you can see how much would we collect, what could we do with it, what are those full costs. But again, I'm not sure your fundamental kind of things you've articulated tonight are going to change. It may just cause you to adjust slightly, but it was very helpful for us. So.
Okay, does anybody have anything else? All right, we'll close the public hearing at 7:16. Thank the audience for bearing with us on a very boring subject, but this is how our policies are made in this community. All right, that concludes the agenda for the Capital Improvement Advisory Meeting. So we will adjourn at 7:17. We'll take a momentary break to let Mr. Brown clear the dais, and then we'll re-adjourn as Planning and Zoning.